Okay, and we should be live.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Prabhupada. We're going to start our program in just a minute. Let's begin with some pranams and opening prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namani. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurava Pacharine. Nirvisesha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri
Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaurava.
Hare Krishna
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Hare
Krishna
Hare
Krishna, Hare Hare,
Ram
Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram
Hare
Hare.
and Vanchakalpatruviyascha Kripa Sindhubheva
Panchakapaturivischaki Pasnivicha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha.
So we want to thank the devotees that are joining us here today. We have a few devotees who are members of the North American Council, the leadership team, who are here with us on Zoom, and many devotees who are joining in on YouTube. So appreciate all of you being with us. My name is Anutama Das. I've been asked to host this session, which we will be discussing and hearing from Niranjana Swami about the situation that is going on in Ukraine from the perspective of the Hare Krishna devotees and the Hare Krishna Society there in Ukraine. I serve as the communications minister of ISKCON, and I'm a GBC colleague of Maharaj, so I'm very honored to be with him and have a chance to speak with him and shed some light on this very difficult situation that's existing for many people, including a lot of devotees that are there in Ukraine. So Maharaj, thank you very much for being with us today. I think almost everyone here will probably know Maharaj and his background, but just very briefly, Maharaj has been a member of ISKCON since 1973. He accepted the Sannyas Order of Life or Renunciate Order in 1986, and he's actually been active in preaching and visiting Ukraine since 1989. So he has many decades of background there in the Ukraine, and he's currently serving. He preaches in the Ukraine, and he's the governing body commissioner for Ukraine. So Maharaj, thank you very much for being with us today. And Maharaj, I think you're muted. Somebody may be
Okay,
muted.
sorry about that.
Yeah,
I don't know how it happened, but I probably did it inadvertently. Thank you very much for inviting me, Manutama Prabhu. I'm very honored to be given this opportunity to speak with you. And I thank Kaladri Prabhu also for initiating this interview as well.
Maharaj, what part of the world are you in right now? I think you recently were in Ukraine, if I understand correctly.
I was in Ukraine last week. Yeah, what I've done is I'm spending time in Budapest. That's where I am right now, because the only way to get into Ukraine is by driving. So I drove to Ukraine a little over a week ago. I spent several days there for a retreat, an event with devotees, and I've done it a couple of times, and I hope to do it more because it's impossible to fly into Ukraine. So Shiva Maharaj has very kindly given me his office to use as a base to go back and forth between here and Ukraine.
Yeah, and interesting because Hungary actually has been a base for a lot of the ISKCON support. We'll talk about later. A lot of the ISKCON support for devotees in the Ukraine and other people, refugees from Ukraine, have been directed by devotees in Hungary. So appropriate place for you to be.
Very, very appropriate.
So Maharaj, maybe just for a little bit of a background, I know I've traveled quite a bit around the ISKCON world, but I've never been to Ukraine, and I'm sure a lot of devotees haven't. Maybe you can tell us a little bit kind of the history of ISKCON's presence in the Ukraine and of our preaching work there, just kind of get us up to maybe, pre a couple of years ago, quote, military conflict. What's our history there and maybe even how you got involved?
Well, actually, the history goes back certainly before my time. I was simply riding on the crest of the wave of the work that was done by the former preachers in the former Soviet Union, who actually had been the catalyst to establish book distribution. And of course, first and foremost was Srila Prabhupada in 1971. And I personally got, and when I went in 1989, I personally got to see what Prabhupada's visit in 1971 had actually accomplished, and to see also subsequently what his books had done to change people's lives. In fact, I have to confess that one of the greatest inspirations that I had when I was visiting the former Soviet Union during communist times was just how much Srila Prabhupada's books were transforming people's lives, because they were just so eager for something, a divine message, and Prabhupada had the most divine message to distribute. And the devotees, of course, as is well known, risked their lives for printing them and for distributing them. And in my very first visits in the former Soviet Union in the late 1980s, I saw how they had stocked their books. And one of the things that really inspired me the most was reading the letters. I used to spend time in the office where the book publication was going on, and I used to cull through all the different letters they had received from people who had read Prabhupada's books. And in fact, I still have some. I have hundreds of them that were written back in the late 1980s. Just stories, people just, their hearts just so melted, so happy to know that Krishna exists. And that was sort of like, I came in on the, as I say, on the crest of the wave in 1989. Kirti Raj and Harikesh Swami, of course, had made their contribution. And I oftentimes say that Kirti Raj Prabhu is an unsung hero for establishing Krishna consciousness in the former Soviet Union. And I really feel that, and I feel so indebted to him, and devotees to this very day, who from the early days, who remember him, always remember him so fondly and so appreciatively of the kind of sacrifices he made for them. And unfortunately, not many devotees know about that. So from time to time, I always try to remind them that of how much indebted they should be for the work that he had actually done in those early years. So I just came in at the request of Kirti Raj. They were looking for somebody who could go to the former Soviet Union. And it was at that time, it was still under communist rule. And it was to go, I had to go as a tourist, and they were very expensive. And it just so happened that the one person that I knew who lives in Los Angeles now, his name is Charlie Gear. He had met the devotees, and he was very interested in going there. And I said, why don't you go? And he said, I'll go, but I won't go without you. So I contacted Kirti Raj, and Kirti Raj said, we're just now looking for somebody who will go. And Charlie Gear sponsored my trips during the Soviet times as a tourist. So many of the trips, and came along with me. And I have so many photos that he had taken in those early visits back in the former Soviet times. And they're very precious for me.
I know Charlie, but I didn't know that part of his history. And a lot of us old timers know about Kirti Raj's contributions, but I'm glad you highlighted that today, because more devotees should know about the sacrifices that went on from people outside. What to speak of devotees who were living under that Soviet regime. So yeah, that's important. Tell us how did things develop then, Maraja, in the Ukraine? You know, in Ukraine, get us up to the point of, you know, before this conflict arose. And for a lot of devotees around the world, and I think for a lot of people around the world, Ukraine was not necessarily on the radar so much, but we know there'd been tremendous amount of growth there, and a pretty significant presence of devotees and temples in Ukraine.
Yes, well, from the time I began visiting, I think about 2 years passed, and then when things opened up in 1991, Kirti Raj at that particular point decided that he had sacrificed at least a decade or more for the Soviet preaching, and his children at that time, he confessed, didn't even know they had a father, as how he described his family situation. And he was thinking it was probably time for him to spend more time with his family, and to take up some other initiatives that he could do from a distance, rather than work that he had done up until that point. So he asked those of us who were visiting the Soviet Union if we would take over various areas of responsibility. And it was his initiative to give different countries and different parts of Russia to the different leaders at the time. And he requested me at that time if I would become the GBC of Ukraine. I had been visiting it. I had already established a relationship with the leader, Achyuta Priyadas, who had been active in Krishna consciousness since the early 1980s. He was, I already knew him well. We bonded well. And so I continued from that point on, 1991, as the GBC of Ukraine. And of course, I was visiting other countries as well, but because our focus is Ukraine, I'll just stick with Ukraine. But I was visiting Russia. I was visiting the Baltic countries. And I was at one time, for the first maybe 5 or 6 years after the fall of communism, I was visiting approximately 90 cities a year throughout the former Soviet Union. It was quite a lot of traveling. But then gradually I focused on Ukraine. And one of the initiatives that I became inspired to do in Ukraine, with the inspiration that I got from visiting Chaupati and Radhanath Maharaj in the early 90s, when I started to go there to Chaupati, is I felt it was initiative was the establishing of a system of devotee care. So that started, the seed was planted in the late 1990s. I'd say maybe somewhere around 1997, when we started the devotee care, but it took many years, many years for it to get off the ground. And I realized that sometimes there was a misunderstanding of what the devotee care system was. Some people were thinking I created it to take care of my disciples or something. I don't know. There were different ideas of what it was, which was completely had no connections of a system that I created to take care of my disciples. It was something that I felt it needed to be done because so many devotees were joining. And I had the experience of the past of seeing many devotees joining. And unfortunately, seeing ISKCON as to be like a revolving door, watching people leave was probably one of the most painful experiences that I had gone through in my early years of preaching as a sannyasi, in many places where I had been traveling. So I felt that this devotee care was something to try to inhibit or to restrict or restrain the revolving door phenomena, to give a long-term vision of how devotees can feel connected to Prabhupada's mission throughout their whole life. So it was started in the 1997, and it took several years for me to kind of really preach it. And fortunately for me is Achyuta Priya understood it. It really took hold in his heart. And I can say with confidence that I'm just watching how things evolved by his hard work in establishing this system in Ukraine.
Maj, tell us what's some of the results of that. I mean, because I think a lot of us don't really have a sense how many communities are in Ukraine, how many Bhakti Vrikshas or whatever, category of home programs. Are there schools, temples, deities, farms? I know it's a large presence there, but give us some sense of that.
Well, it's because our focus of development was really grassroots, and we really avoided the phenomenon of building big temples with funds from outside. We wanted them to be organic development and focus on people first, and projects would evolve naturally when the inspiration was there on a local basis. So because of that, gradually over time, I'd say there was Ukraine, as it was, had about 25 temples, and it gradually evolved. I think there's about 360 namhatas that were just prior to the war that were going on throughout Ukraine. And we had done an assessment in 2000, I think it was 2013 was the last big festival that we had, which is the Bhakti Sangama festival, just before the conflict began in 2014. And at that festival, attendance was 14,000 devotees. And most of them, there were some from other countries, but most of them were from Ukraine region. And gradually we begin to calculate over time that there was about 20,000 devotees, practicing devotees in Ukraine. And there are, as I said, we were up to about 25 temples that organically manifested by the local devotees donating funds. In some cases, like in the Kiev temple, the devotees did most of the construction themselves. It's a 7-story building, but it was built mostly by devotees, and even most of the materials were acquired by going to the various factories and just begging, begging for bricks, begging for cement, concrete. One devotee used to go out in the street and she used to flag down cranes, and for prasadam, she would invite the cranes to come to lift the concrete slabs to gradually build the temple. And that's how the Kiev temple was how it began. The construction began in 1991, and it's still going on because it's like that. But 20,000 devotees, about 360 namhatas and counselor groups, and even in Kiev today, before the conflict, there were about 96 groups meeting outside the temple, and although many devotees left when the conflict began, some have returned, and even actively right now, there are 80 groups in Kiev who are meeting mostly online. And that's one of the initiatives that they did, is to how to keep the devotees who had left Ukraine connected with their particular close groups that they had developed friendly relationships with, trusting relationships with. And in fact, I have to say that, I mean, all credit again, I go to Achyuta Priya and the devotees who are assisting him. But in my course of travels through Europe, and where I've met devotees who have forced to flee, mostly women and children, I would say maybe 90% of them have told me, at least 90% have told me that their main connection is with their groups who are still in Ukraine. That's their connection, that's their nourishment, that's their pushti, tushti, nourishment and satisfaction that they're getting is through the sanghas that were established locally, and they've kind of tried to keep it connected through online, through Zoom. They had 2 years opportunity to become a Zoom conscious for association, and therefore when the conflict began, they just continued to do that, although for many it was quite traumatic in the beginning. And I'll probably have to at some point address some of those topics about the trauma that took place in the lives of many of the devotees as a result of the conflict.
Raj, tell us a little more about at least some of the direct impact in terms of, we know we were seeing, I mean, so much horrendous video footage of apartment complexes being destroyed and homes being destroyed. And of course, thousands of people fleeing the country. And we know in different countries, Hungary, we mentioned before, Romania and Poland, devotees were there, assisting ISKCON devotees who left the country and also other refugees. Tell us a little more about the impact. Do we have some sense of these 20,000 devotees? How many of them had to relocate, and are they back home, most of them now? Have they all had to leave, some of the eastern areas of the country? What's happening on the ground now?
I would say we don't have statistics. It would be very difficult to gather statistics because, I mean, there are devotees who are just independently and understandably so had to leave Ukraine at the time when the conflict began. And one of the things that I was privy to is that there was devotees in Europe, in Western Europe, who saw the huge influx of Ukrainian refugees. And basically I I spoke to the GBC, I think even, and when I was giving a GBC report saying that, my hands are full for what's going on in Ukraine. If some of the leaders in Europe take up the initiative, there'll be a lot of work that needs to be done to facilitate and accommodate the large numbers of devotees who are leaving. And of course, most of them were women and children, because males couldn't leave from 18 to 60. Males were not allowed to, ages 18 to 60, were not allowed to leave Ukraine. So many of the women and children had to leave. And I was very enlivened and encouraged to see that there were many devotees, and I give all credit to them for their willingness and sacrifices they made. I should mention one devotee. Her name is Sukanti Radha from England, and she did so much to try to mobilize the devotees and amongst the different temples to give them some kind of vision of how to facilitate the influx of refugees. And she was gradually began working with myself and with Pragosh Prabhu, and she was helping to facilitate devotees who are looking for ways to get out of Ukraine. She had ways to do that. And although I can't disclose how it was done, she had connections, and she was working with one of the devotees who still, even to this day, he's the coordinator of evacuations, because on the front lines in some of the cities and the front lines, there are devotees who still need to evacuate, and they need to either go to Western Ukraine, which many of them are doing, or some of them they have gone to Europe. I will say that the large numbers of devotees who left towards the beginning of the conflict, of them, many of them have returned. They have returned because they didn't feel that, they felt, although that Ukraine was unpredictable, they also felt that being in Europe was unpredictable. And many of them were really, they needed to go back. Their husbands were there. They couldn't leave. And that's why we tried to create in the western part of Ukraine, we tried to create art centers as a place where families could go, so that the women and children could stay within Ukraine with the husbands and the fathers. So that's why some of our centers in Ukraine became our temples in Ukraine, places where refugee families would go and would be accommodated, to try to minimize the number of devotees going into Europe and being without a husband, and the children being without their father. So that initiative kind of happened naturally, organically, spontaneously, and that's also being supported by those centers in North America. For instance, ISKCON Silicon Valley has come forward to sponsor all the refugees who are living in our retreat center called Magdalenivka, New Mayapur, it's called, where there are about 200 refugees there, families, women and children, who've left everything behind. They were mostly from Kharkiv, but from many other cities that were heavily destroyed. And ISKCON Silicon Valley gives a monthly donation to support the refugees there. The Canadian devotees took an initiative to support refugees who are in the city of Lviv in Western Ukraine, where there are many also families who have been given shelter, and they're also supporting them. But of course, there are many devotees throughout Ukraine who can't evacuate, who can't leave. Either they have elderly parents, they have no place to go, they have families. It's difficult for them to move a husband and wife with children to live communally. It's not always so easy. Those who left the eastern parts of Ukraine, mostly as a whole family, they did so because they lost everything. I mean, there are stories, one devotee who was on the front line, where the Chuttapriya was oftentimes calling them, suggesting that they should probably consider sheltering elsewhere because the conflict was increasing. And 2 days after he left, a missile went right through his flat, and the people on both sides of the flat were killed. But because he left, fortunately, Krishna's protected him. And I just checked with the Chuttapriya a couple of days ago. Amongst the devotee population, there have been no casualties of the conflict, no casualties of devotees. I mean, nobody's lost. There's been injuries. The only casualties were those devotees who had to go to the front lines and fight. And there's under 10 we have been lost. But as those who are not fighting on the front lines, there have been no casualties, although definitely some devotees have been injured.
So no devotee civilian deaths, although some have been injured, but you say about 10 of the devotees that were serving in the military have passed away.
I think the figure is 9. I think 9.
Okay.
Yes.
Less than 10. One thing I just want to mention to devotees that are watching this live, if you'd like to, we're going to be having some opportunity for additional questions to Maharaj, and you can put your questions in the YouTube live chat, and then they will be relayed from there to me, so we can try to open up for some other questions in addition to the few I still have. Maharaj, you specifically mentioned Silicon Valley. That's wonderful to hear that they're sponsoring New Mayapur in Western Ukraine, and you mentioned that the Canadian devotees are sponsoring devotees in Lviv, if I pronounced it correctly.
Yes, Lviv. Yes, correct.
My poor notes. What are some of the other things? Because I know devotees a lot of times, there's kind of an outpouring of support and concern when it first reaches our attention, but the way things work in this world, there's another wave of crisis, whether it's a hurricane or a tornado or death in the family or something else. And sometimes we lose our focus. It sounds like there's still a need for help, and we want to come back to this later, but at this point of the conversation, I think it's a good time to just say, what can devotees do that would like to help? How can they reach out? How can they help? Maybe there's other communities that could be sponsored. You mentioned there were several that now have a lot of devotee refugees from various parts of the country that are in some of our Western communities. And maybe there's others that could use some sponsorship as well.
Yes, in fact, I think it would be a good opportunity to at least say that right now there's about 21 devotee volunteers who are part of the Share Your Care team. They've all been working selflessly and tirelessly to maintain this Share Your Care team project, and beginning from the project coordinator to helping with the communications, helping with producing videos, fundraising, and keeping records of all the funds and disbursement of funds to devotees in need. To date, I think somewhere around 2,800 devotees have received emergency financial assistance as a result of the funds which have been raised worldwide. It's quite a substantial number, and I have access to the spreadsheet, and I can say that even as of November 1st, I think that November 1st there were about 14 new requests from devotees. They're coming in regularly, of describing situations that harrowing, of no money, no employment, especially devotees who are in occupied cities where they have no employment, no work, no means of income. There's no medicines. Food is accessible, but to buy food, they need money. And some devotees are described in the cities. In these cities, their flats were destroyed, and so even as of November 1st, like 14 requests came from different devotees, family One came from a devotee who lost her husband. And he was fighting on the front lines. She had to move and she has no support. And the husband, when the child was 2 weeks old, and they were in Mariupol at the time, and they were living in the basement at that time, back in the early days of the conflict. They were living in the basement with no food, no electricity, no gas. They were melting snow for water. And they did that for 6 weeks. And then they had to flee to go someplace else. And then the husband went into to fight, and he was killed. And now she has no support. And that just came in recently as a request for assistance. Another devotee put in a request for assistance because he has no place to live. He's cooking on the streets. There's no gas. He has to build a fire outside. Whatever food he can get, access to food he can get, with the help of the funds he's been receiving from Share Your Care. He purchases some food and he cooks on a fire outside. And of course, as all of you know right now, winter is approaching, and a lot of places there's been a loss of electricity, and even in some of our temples, devotees need electricity to get water. Generators are required, and which is a new need which is recently developed, is the need for some generators in some of the temples. So this is something that's happening. I mean, it's current. It's not something that that happened in the beginning of the conflict. It's continuous activity and needs. And the devotees, they take all these requests that come in regularly. They go through the sheet and they disperse funds to the individuals or families. To different ways they get through these funds to them, so that they can at least maintain themselves at this particular time. But as winter approaches, it's going to become even much more difficult. As all of you know, the European energy crisis, and Ukraine is, I can't imagine how it's going to be for devotees how they're going to live with no heat in the winter. I know what Ukrainian winters are like. I've lived through, 33 of them. And but the buildings were always well heated. And if they weren't, I don't know if I would have survived. I don't know it's such a state of unpredictability. It's difficult to say, what's in store for the devotees over the winter, but definitely funds are always needed. And that's the best way they can help. And there's a website which is established. It's called shareyour.care. And devotees throughout the world, I can say, and I know that they've already produced so many videos of devotees with folded hands describing their gratitude for the worldwide Vaishnava community. I can say thank you, but these are the devotees who are really saying it, saying it from their hearts. And there's many videos there of devotees just expressing their gratitude, that they're still, their faith, their trust, their encouragement and their inspiration to go on serving is a result of the widespread care. I can perfectly vouch for myself. I didn't have to raise funds. I've done very little. I've just in the background. I just try to facilitate all the devotees who want to do something. And therefore people are calling me, Maharaj, what can I do? What can I do? Tell me what I can do, what I can do. Oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this. I haven't had to do much in the way of fundraising. I mean, some of the GBCs did take an initiative. For instance, Giri Hari Maharaj, he asked me if I would do an interview similar to the interview that you requested me to do today. He asked about the history of the Ukraine Yatra. I told him a lot about its evolution. I didn't even know that his intention was to raise funds. I was just telling him about the Ukraine Yatra. And then he asked me, thank you, Maharaj. And then I left. And then he personally, everyone who was on the Zoom conference, he personally took the initiative. Everyone, hundreds of people present. And thousands, as a result of his initiative, thousands of dollars were sent to share your care. And I think it's just a natural desire that devotees have to want to help other devotees who are in need.
Let me just take a second to clarify, because you mentioned it once, but the website where devotees can go to find out more is shareyour.care. Again, it's
Correct.
shareyour.care. There is another unaffiliated, also wonderful website called Share Your Care, which Kaladri of North America helps facilitate some support from here to those efforts. But particularly to help with Ukraine, it's shareyour.care. So you want to
shareyour.care. And if you go there, you'll see the statistics, the number of devotees who've been given individual financial support, the number of families who've been accommodated in Western Ukraine, the number of places of prasadam that have been distributed to the devotees, and specifically the cities right now, the places which are on the front lines where if communities or individuals or communities wish to adopt them and sponsor them, then their donations can go directly to those communities who are accommodating refugees.
Whereas I
It's
know
all there on this.
in some places, like in Alachua, Florida, earlier in October, I think the 8th of October, they held a special One Day for Ukraine event, and they raised some money, and they've got people donated all kinds of clothes and things. So I want to call out appreciation for the Vera with the Vaishnava International Relief Association organized that. I know one of the things that they did, and there may be other people also wondering, can we collect a bunch of clothes and send them over? When we hear relief efforts, we hear, tents and blankets and, warm clothes and things like that. Is that helpful? And if so, will there be information about that on the website? Or at this point is, there's the shipping and getting it across the borders and all that.
Very difficult shipping into Ukraine right now.
So
very
to send money at this point. Is that the bottom line?
At this point in time, it's better to send money, and because it will be used. I mean, everything is accounted for, I know exactly how much is available now on a day-to-day basis, how much is going to the temples, how much is going to individuals. It's all recorded online. And as I said, the 21 devotees are all volunteering their services. Nobody's getting anything for this. It's all going directly to the devotees who require it.
So Marge, we're getting a couple of questions. Devotees are asking a little bit about, the funds and how they're allocated. So they can go to that same website, shareyour.care, to get more information about where the funds are going and how.
Correct. Yeah, it's all there on the site. The site was developed by a devotee who wanted to help, and he's so responsive. It's amazing. He's in Mayapur. He just is so responsive to help. Anytime some statistics or information needs to be put, he's right there taking care of it, and he's providing all the information.
Marge, we had a specific question.
He's a devotee from Russia, by the way.
We had a specific question. Bhadani Ryan Swami wanted to ask. His hands up here. Maybe he's got a different question, but specifically, he was curious, how much does a generator cost? That sounds like with this winter coming up, that may be the difference between life and death for a few people, and definitely life and very, very serious illness. So,
Anutama, if you can hear me, is that all right? Can I ask my question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'd like to know how much a generator would cost, and I'd like to know, can we give, in other words, we would send the money, you would buy it, but if we were, I'd like to see if we could fund a couple generators, but it would have to be for a dedicated, in other words, they would need to know, okay, I'm buying a generator, and the money would buy that generator. Is that possible?
Yes. Absolutely. Definitely
so
possible.
How much does generator cost?
Well, for instance, in Kiev, many of the brahmacharis had to move back. And the Kiev is a big temple. I think you've seen it before. And the generator for Kiev is the cost for a generator to get water, just to keep the water supply going and to provide electricity has already been priced at $10,000.
So for $10,000, we could buy a generator for the Kiev temple.
Definitely.
Okay, thanks, Marsh.
And you can send it to a nonprofit account, and that nonprofit could probably just purchase it right directly from your donation, and
All
it
right,
would go
Marsh,
directly to the Key Temple.
We're on it.
Thank you. Thank you,
Well,
Niranjana.
hey, let's get the money. Don't thank me yet.
So then we're understanding that that the efforts that devotees have done in other parts of the world really have made a significant contribution in terms of helping provide for resources and reallocation and supporting families that are there. Marge, I know you had a video that you said you might be able to share with us. We didn't get a chance to test the technology before we went live, but is that something maybe we can try to show this time? I think that gives
Yeah, it's a short video. I think I could probably show it.
Okay, let's try that. Let's see if that works.
Okay, let me see if I can get it online. I just should.
All right, while you're doing that, could you estimate, for instance, the idea of donating a generator? How many major centers with deities and devotee residents would there be for additional generators? Estimate.
Well, some of the centers have had to close because they're one of the centers, for instance, in Dnipropetrovsk, which is now known as Dnipro, is near a military installation, and the train station is right down the street, and it's been closed. The deities have been moved, although devotees, small numbers of devotees, do gather there, and other temples have been closed. Operations are still going on in Kharkiv, although and that would be another temple. A Vinnytsia temple is another temple that's just quite active. I would say for active temples, maybe five or six, which are still devotees are gathering in active temples where generators could be required, depending on where the next strike on the infrastructure is going to be. But Kiev, as you all know, I mean, I was talking to devotees in Kiev just a couple of days ago, and they say that electricity is sparse. They don't have it, and water supplies are also been heavily affected.
Maj, if there are provided generators, I mean, just so we get a sense of it, because we're so far away. I mean, can you buy other fuel? I mean, generators don't burn air. Is there gas or diesel or whatever else is?
Yes, it's available. It's available. I mean, as I said, I was just there last week, and in most of the places, the economy is working, but it's crippled. But there is gas available, and but I can't say what's happening on the front lines. Nobody knows what's happening on the front lines, and I do hear some stories of the devotees who are fleeing and need to flee because the situation is very desperate. And I can't speak for those smaller communities, but as far as the larger ones are concerned, yes, petrol is still available, and it would be available. But what they would have to do is purchase it and store it. They would not only have to buy generators, but they would have to buy storage cans to store the containers of petrol, because it's not always easily accessible. They would have to get a large supply and store it, which would be additional costs, but it can be gotten.
Very good. Any luck with the video, Maharaj, or it's not?
Oh yeah, I sorry. Luck with the video. I just hope I can somehow. It's not coming up. I'm not sure why. One more thing here. I do have it, and I'm pretty sure I can get it to go, but I just need to. I guess my connection is a little bit slow for some reason. There's a lot of things opened here.
We can wait a moment, see if that comes up. I think that would be really informative for all of us.
It would be very informative. And let's see if I can get it to come up now. Hopefully it will. Do you hear audio?
We are hearing some audio, but we're just.
Okay, now all I have to do is get this, is the screen to share.
For more than 8 months, a war has been going on in
I'm not
Ukraine.
sure why
Devotees keep
I
asking us
can't
for
get the
help.
screen to see.
The devotees
Uh,
in the occupied cities and towns on the front line are facing
Wait a minute. Yes, here it is. I got it.
Okay, wonderful.
a worse situation.
Is that?
Maharaj, if you
seen?
can also put the video in full screen.
A war has been going on in Ukraine. Devotees keep asking us for help. The devotees in the occupied cities and towns on the front line are facing the worst situation. The economy is not operational there, and it is close to impossible for them to support themselves. Many devotees need to be evacuated. You might be asking, how to help Ukrainian devotees? Share Your Care Fund is the tool you can use to do this. Main objectives of the project: helping devotees and their families relocate from conflict zones, help support devotees who are unable to maintain themselves, supporting brahmacharis, deities sell, food relief. From the 27th of February till the 31st of October, 2,796 devotees have received individual financial aid. 451 devotees have been given shelter in communities with support. On our website, you can choose one of the Ukrainian yatras and take care of such a yatra on your own or jointly as a whole community. For example, you can take care of the New Mayapur community, where more than 100 devotees fleeing the war have found shelter. Moreover, you can find information on most urgent situations, such as evacuating from a war zone or surgery. Now, the following devotees appeal for our help in urgent matters. Mataji Olena, whose husband was killed fighting on the front line. She has a 9-month-old baby and lives in a different city as a displaced person. Ruslan Prabhu and his family, who had survived the hell of Mariupol. A shell hit their house. They are forced to get settled in a new place. Devotees from the frontline town of Bakhmut. They have neither electricity nor gas. They are forced to spend most of their time in the basement, hiding from shelling. The fund was established on the initiative of Achyuta Prabhu, ISKCON Regional Secretary for Ukraine and Moldova, and Niranjana Swami, GBC representative for Ukraine. Even a small contribution from each of us can save the devotees' lives. Serving the devotees, your Share Your Care team.
Thank you, Raj. Very, very moving and informative. We had, I hope everyone can hear me now if we're back. There was one question specifically, and I think this is explained in the video, but if a devotee is interested in helping to support a particular family, you know, that one woman with her 9-month-old child, they can go to that site and they can give for specific projects and individuals they'd like to help.
Yes, in fact, that's already been done many times. There was a devotee who required emergency surgery. Oops, wait a minute. Excuse me. I forgot to turn off the devotee required emergency and people donated specifically for his surgery and for his recovery, and they gave even more than was asked, but all that was given to him because he was going to be out of work for quite some time. That was one of so many examples of devotees. It goes directly to the person who requires assistance, financial assistance, if somebody donates directly to that.
Raj, let me ask you a little bit kind of a, not so much a generator and send money kind of question, but I think a lot of us would also be concerned. And I know from your presentations to the GBC in the past that, there's been a lot of emotional, spiritual pressure and challenges for devotees. So tell us a little bit, if you can, how have you been able to assist devotees and what's giving them the strength to go on? I mean, a lot of us that live in countries that haven't had war and haven't gone through the type of, crisis that the Ukrainian devotees are facing, we struggle with our day-to-day challenges as we're quite minuscule in comparison. So, share some thoughts with us if you could, how are the devotees finding the strength to go on? And what are you saying to them? What are you and Achutapriya and other leaders? How are you encouraging them in the midst of such crisis?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm saying, what Achutapriya is saying the most. I mean, I have given lectures to the Ukraine devotees, and I've discussed these points with them and about how to deal with these unforeseen circumstances. And I try to make it philosophical for sure. And but for what I've seen, what's been most effective for keeping the devotees strong, making them resilient, is camaraderie. And they have relationships. They've learned how to have relationships with their peers. They've learned how to respect elders. They've learned how to approach senior devotees. And there are devotees who've been not only trained, but who are naturally inclined, because they're feeling sheltered, to help other devotees. So because it's community and camaraderie is still going on, even in the midst of all of this that's happening to them, they're keeping it together amongst themselves, because that's what they've learned. They've learned it from the beginning. They've grown up in their Krishna consciousness with that mood of camaraderie, regular association, friendship, having prasadam together, studying philosophy together, revealing their minds in confidence. Dadati pratigrinati guyamakyati pichati. It's all manifest in their lives with each other. So they have each other. And I'd say my observation is that's been reminding the devotees of what they have, and which has been coming from me. And what Achutapriya is not only reminding them, but he's right there and he's doing it. That's what's giving the devotees a sense of hope, because despite the difficulties they're confronting, there's a sense of care and Krishna consciousness, which is a focus of their lives, which is, of course, is ultimately what's going to help anybody in a difficult situation. When it really comes down to it, sometimes, devotees have learned how to put up their hands like Draupadi and say, "Hey, Govinda," this not much else they can do, but now they're doing it together, and because they're doing it together and they do it regularly together, I'd say that's their greatest strength. And I'm just so grateful that they've learned it. And I guess that's the best way to respond to your question.
That's beautiful. I think that's something we all the rest of us globally can apply. We, hopefully no more of us will face that kind of intense crisis, but this world's full of one crisis after another. And learning from our God brothers and God sisters in Ukraine is helpful. Maharaj, Bani Maharaj put up an interesting comment. He said, "I saw Ukraine is in a top spot on the latest World Sankirtan newsletter. What's the story behind that? Did tell us devotees are going out distributing books? Are there Harinam parties still going on? Prasad distribution? How is this miracle within a crisis happening?"
Well, devotees have really been, they all know it was Prabhupada's books that got them started, and they all know that their future is in Prabhupada's books. That's in their blood. And they're printing and preparing printing of Ukrainian books in Ukraine. There's a devotee there who's a printer, and he's actually working with the Northeast BBT and working on, we have put together a whole team of Ukrainian translators, because Ukrainian books are going to be required for the future. Again, this is the mastermind of Achutapriya Prabhu, and I'm just getting behind him in his vision. And there are devotees in the western parts of Ukraine and in Kiev. In fact, I sent a few pictures to Dandavats, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, of a devotee who sent me pictures, who was distributing books right on the spot, which was in the news when the missile landed in Kiev. He goes out there every day and he distributes books, and he sends me his Sankirtan stories like twice a week, his book distribution stories. And he's telling me like how amazing it is, how appreciative people are for getting Srila Prabhupada's books. And there's some devotees who are still doing it. In fact, this devotee who sends me these reports, when I was in America I left America, I think a little over a week or two weeks ago, I found in a box, I had my altar that I used on traveling Sankirtan in 1974, 75, and 76. It was a little altar that I used, a Panchatattva, back in those days, we were all in our vans and our temples were vans. And I found the altar and I found Prabhupada's picture and I brought it with me to the festival last week and I gave it to the book distributors and say, here's something to meditate on when you go out in book distribution every day. So they are still distributing books, but certainly not in the numbers that used to be like before. But there are devotees who are still going, and there's still devotees who are planning and preparing for the future to go out and distribute books. And food distribution, of course, is going on in all the major cities. All the major cities. That's Food for Life is going on, and it's been going on ever since the very beginning. And that's, of course, a separate fund that they do their fundraising because it's a broader outreach to other people who are more inclined to distribute food. So their Food for Life programs are being funded mostly from their outreach areas and from devotees as well. There are some devotees who feel very inclined to help sponsor food distribution in Ukraine as well. So that's going on. Harinams, no, although we did have a retreat, as I mentioned, 850 devotees attended the retreat we had in the Carpathian Mountains last week. And by donations that I received, I was able to sponsor with those donations about 150 devotees who otherwise would have never been able to come. And others who were able to come at least pay for transportation. We had in the usual Bhakti Sangama festival style, people just gave donations to pay for food. We had feasts, we had every day devotees cooking. In fact, I have about 300 pictures on my site of that event. And needless to say, there were a lot of tears of gratitude to have that opportunity. Bhakti Vaibhava Maharaj was there, Madhavananda Prabhu also was there. And we're looking forward to the next time when we can do something like that. But it's not easy, it's a risk. When I was in Lviv for Janmashtami and Vyasa Puja, the air raid sirens were going off constantly. And the Chutapriya and I had discussed what to do under those circumstances, and there were no basements to go through. So we decided that Kirtan was the best shelter.
I'd like to keep the awareness alive in North America. I run the Google group with our 120 centers. I wonder if there's a weekly newsletter or update that we could get that I could post on a regular basis to keep the devotees aware and informed.
Kalaji Prabhu, I can't thank you enough for asking that question. I also requested the Share Your Care team to produce newsletters. They're working so hard, it's hard for me to push them, and they did produce a few of them, but they haven't come out with the kind of frequency that I hoped for. But now with your words and your initiative, I can repeat your request and I'll try to see. There is a devotee in Canada who produces them and sends them out. He lives in Ottawa, but he needs the material from the devotees who are inside Ukraine. So I will remind them and tell them that you're eager to have such a newsletter. And let's see if it can go out and would be sent directly to you. Hopefully I'll begin working on that immediately.
Maharaj, you
Thank
can
you.
also mention them. I know in the early days and weeks and months, the ISKCON News was publishing regular updates. We were getting, I think, almost weekly. So those can be shared. We'll certainly distribute those
Yes.
as best we
And
can.
all gratitude goes to you and to both the devotees. Definitely are thankful for all that ISKCON News has done for promoting their needs as well as Dandavats. Actually, I have a whole list of different projects globally that I wanted to give an honorable mention to, but definitely ISKCON News and Dandavats is one, and certainly Vera was another project that I know the devotees and Alatra are working and helping towards that. And many GBC members have come forward, as I said in the beginning, and asking how can we help. And I could, if I know I've missed some, but definitely I remember that ISKCON News was there on the list.
Well, you mentioned some other very important ones like Vera. I was down there for the Vera event. Devotees worked very, very hard to try to raise awareness.
Oh yeah, there was once what devotees I wish to mention. There, and when this conflict first started, the devotees in Chicago, Sri Guru Charana Padma and Raj Mohan, who have a nonprofit, and they opened up their site and their nonprofit to receive funds for everybody wanted to give donations, but they want to give to a nonprofit. And they worked so hard, tirelessly. I was on the phone with Sri Guru constantly. She was staying up late at night, and in the beginning she was really a major player. And at some point we realized that we have to give her a break, and we moved to other venues and let them go on with other. But she's another devotee, and her husband Raj Mohan were very instrumental in helping at the beginning of this effort. And there are more. I'm sure I have forgotten some. Please forgive me if I haven't covered everybody. But
There's a lot of people. A lot of people have helped, and they're, I think, and they're especially hearing from you, Maharaj, about the struggles of devotees and how they're stepping up. And as Bhadni Narayan Maharaj pointed out, they're still trying to steer books. There's so much prasadam distributions going on. It really inspires us. Maharaj, just maybe one final question, perhaps if people want to put some more up there, you can. But a question, I mean, in a broader sense, you were traveling all over the former Soviet Union. You've got devotees that look to you for instruction and guidance and disciples in various places. And, we see the kind of sectarianism and polarization that's coming up. We're 1 week away from elections here in the United States. And, it's downright kind of nasty all over the world in terms of identity politics and, just identity, Bhagavad Gita, first instruction, you're not that body. How do you, as a spiritual leader, how do you encourage us to overcome those types of pressures that may come from the communities around us or from our own minds or different conceptions to stay together, united as Vaishnavas and to not kind of succumb to these kind of sectarian ideas that sometimes are propagated on social media and other places? How do you shine the light to get rid of our ignorance on that, Maharaj?
Well, I can only say, speaking from my own experience, is that I really try to, as there's a purport in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Srila Prabhupada, 5th canto, maybe, I can't remember which chapter it is, but it's a beautiful purport. Prabhupada talks about, it's a verse that talks about how anybody who takes up the hearing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even impersonalists, can become devotees of the Lord. And Prabhupada says in our Krishna consciousness movement, devotees have no time for discussions about politics, current events, and sociology, and he lists a whole list of things. He says these things will go their own way. He says the devotees, this is exact words. He said these things will go their own way. The devotees should be utilizing their time for discussing Krishna consciousness and make their lives successful. That's kind of like the essence of his message. I realize that to some degree, there will be many devotees who won't be satisfied with that kind of answer. And they'll say that these things need to be discussed. I believe that social media, like anything else, can be utilized for Krishna services, but I've also seen how it's very destructive. And unfortunately, I observe that too many people get into too much social topics and don't use it for its real value, is to using it for Krishna consciousness. I believe if devotees were a little bit more conscientious about that and utilizing it for giving a solid Krishna conscious message that's not sectarian, and I believe that's at least I shine a little light on something to help avoid this disastrous result of conflict in the material world. I've tried to avoid discussing these topics, and I feel that the best way the devotees can actually do something is by doing something. And besides just being vocal about social issues, there are people suffering, and Prabhupada says when people are suffering, we should be thinking about how to relieve their suffering. Of course, Krishna consciousness is the best way, but we shouldn't simply idly stand by and watch other people suffering wherever they may be. I've raised funds not only for devotees in Ukraine, but I've sent funds to devotees in Russia also, and in other areas, because nobody has an exclusive claim to suffering in the material world. Krishna clearly says it's from the highest planet to the lowest planet. It's not in this country or that country. It's everywhere, and nobody can claim exclusive right for suffering. So we should care and try to do the best we can to help relieve others' suffering. And try to remember what Prabhupada said: Krishna consciousness is the best method. And do whatever we can to contribute to that and to avoid harsh words that will cause others pain. I oftentimes reflect, and I'll end with this one. It's Srila Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha. He gives he quotes a reference. He describes what is disrespect for other living entities. And he quotes a verse from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says that sharp arrows that pierce the chest and approach the heart are not as painful as the insulting words of a materialist, which pierces the chest, enters the heart, and becomes lodged there. He describes that such harsh words that cause pain, to willingly cause pain to others with sharp words, he said this is much more painful than the arrow that enters the chest and approaches the heart. And he defines this as one of the verses he uses as disrespect. I think devotees have to become conscious of what the things that they say that is causing pain to others, and nobody should ever say anything that willfully causes pain to others. That's the best message I can give for that.
Thank you, Maharaj. That's beautiful. Damodar Prabhu, who's helping with our technical background, he put up on the screen the verse you quoted. It's from 5:12:13. From Srila Prabhupada.
Yes, 5:12:13. Yes.
5:12:13.
Yes.
Those who want to look it up. And if I may, Maharaj, just to further add some emphasis on what you said, there's a short quote from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I think that's very connected to this. This is from the Sri Tattva Sutram 35. He writes, those who think that devotion to God and kindness to the jivas are mutually different from each other and perform accordingly in their life, such persons will not be able to follow the devotional culture. Their performance is only a semblance of devotion. Therefore, all the types of beneficence to others, like kindness, friendliness, forgiveness, charity, respect. He didn't say generators, but we probably would have included that if he was writing that today, are included in bhakti. Charity of medicines, clothes, food, water, etc., shelter during adversities, teaching of academic and spiritual education, etc., are the activities included in the devotional culture. So just a little additional emphasis of our acharyas are saying that, we have to take care of the soul and the mind and the body, especially when our Vaishnava brothers and sisters are in distress. So
Thank you so much for that quote. Can I ask where that quote is from?
Yeah, it's from the Sri Tattva Sutram 35. Sri
Thank you.
Tattva Sutram 35.
35. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Maharaj. And thank you for being with us. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. It's been about 75 minutes. Unless you have additional final comments you'd like to make, Maharaj?
Only comments is just to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of the devotees living in Ukraine. And I just encourage devotees to find out what ways that you can possibly do. Of course, I've given the focus of your funds will always be used and always be helped, but any kind words that you can say to help or to care or to mention about the devotees and their struggles, I believe that will also be a very great contribution. And I can say on behalf of these devotees, their hearts are melted by the Vaishnava community. And I don't know how I can express it with a few words like thank you, but I'm sure someday that they will express it in ways much better than I can.
Maharaj, if devotees listening want to, send some of these, express their concern, their love, their worry, their heartfelt desires for the devotees in Ukraine, is there a place like on the website, shareyour.com, where they can put some comments up to be shared? Or how can we send them those messages that you've told us are so encouraging for them?
Well, will this be on YouTube?
Yes, it's on YouTube right now. And I think, Damodar, aren't we going to be recording this and keeping it up there for?
If you're going to keep it up on YouTube, they can just write their comments on YouTube, and I will personally take those comments and share them with the devotees. At least for now, it will take some time to get them on the Share Your Care site. Unfortunately, I have a particular fear about social media that sometimes I see it's abused, and I don't want to have to start, censoring some of the comments. So I'm not completely sure the devotees who want to put a place for comments on Share Your Care. I will have to discuss it with them. It's their initiative, and I don't want to make the decision for them.
Well,
But
at least for now, we can make our prayers and send our comments in our hearts and among ourselves, and that word.
And your comments on YouTube, on this video, and I will take from there and I will share it with the other devotees, and I'll see if the Share Your Care team wishes to open it up on the site for comments like that. I will discuss it with them. I have a couple of takeaways here that I have to work on. One of them is the newsletter, and then the other is about opening up comments on the website.
Maharaj, a lot of other comments from listeners. Thank you very much for sharing the latest news about the Ukraine devotees. Let us all continue to remain united to assist them. Thank you for the support and the help. Hearts are melting just by hearing more about our devotee colleagues in Ukraine. So again, thank you very much, Maharaj, and maybe we can do this in a few more months and hopefully celebrate the end of this conflict and
I would love to do that.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you so much.
So thank you to all the devotees. Thanks to devotees in North America, Kaladri and the North American Council that organized this event. Thank you, Damodar Prabhu, for working on the technical aspects behind it. And thanks for the, I think 100 or so devotees that have joined us on YouTube and those that will be listening to this in the future. And many, many prayers for the leaders and all of the devotees in Ukraine. And we pray that Krishna will protect each and every one of them. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. And thank you to all the devotees attending this also as well for your interest and concerns. Hare Krishna.